afternoon to you all grade 10 Mindsetters. My name is Abram and I'm here to learn more and learn extra on life sciences. As you know that it is a day where we learn more on life sciences. I'm joined by Mr. Eugen. It's been a while, say. How have you been?
I've been well, Abram. It's good to be back and I'm sure the learners are excited as well.
Welcome back. What are you having for us today?
So, well, I know that the grade 10s are busy with cells at the moment, and so we're going to look today at animal cells in specific, and we're going to try and challenge with them with lots of questions. So we're going to do the functions of the different organelles and the parts of a cell.
Okay, so looking forward to that. I hope you are looking forward to it too, Mindsetters. Otherwise, if you have some questions, feel free to throw them on facebook.com/learnextra. Like the page, share the page, invite all your friends to also participate on the page. If you have some questions, throw them in there. Help other Mindsetters on the page also. But you can also tweet us, follow us at learnextra. I'll read some of your tweets later on. And then lastly, download tonight's notes all for free at learn.mindset.co.za. Tell you what, on the notes, we have the test yourself questions, whereby if you fill them and get the answers right, you could also stand a chance of winning an awesome Vodacom airtime voucher, proudly sponsored by Vodacom. So what you need to do is fill in the test yourself questions aside with the right answers, and then take them to the entry form, which is on the document that I'll send you its link on Facebook. So get the link after you've answered the questions, and then you might be the winner. Tomorrow, today's winner will be announced tomorrow. You have up until 10 o'clock p.m. to answer the questions. But for today, we have the challenge question for the Mindsetters.
So guys, let's look at the challenge question. So as I said, we're looking at animal cells. I'm going to very quickly go to the challenge questions, and I'm going to challenge you on this question. So here's the question. What cell structures are only found in animal cells? Again, I'll repeat the question. What cell structures are only found in animal cells? So you've got to go back and think about plant cells and animal cells and identify which are the cell structures or organelles that are exclusively found in animal cells. So we're going to get through those. I hope you guys can. I'm challenging you. It's a good question. It's a good way to revise. So let's get back. So as I said, in this lesson we're going to look at animal cells. Let's look at in specific what we're discussing. So today we're looking at the structure of animal cells. We're going to look at the structure, the parts and their labels, and we're going to discuss the structure and functions of organelles. And we're going to take some time doing this. So we're going to go through the specific organelles, and we're going to look at some revision questions at the end. And I hope you guys download the notes and start answering those questions. Very important for you to at least start testing yourself. It's an awesome way to start revising. So let's get straight into it, guys. And that's the challenge question. That's going to be up on the page. You guys can refer to that. So let's look at cells. And you know that you've already been introduced to, we started the year off in school with the chemistry of life. We looked at organic chemistry. We looked at inorganic chemistry. We looked at all the organic molecules. And now we look at how cells are made up and the parts that make up cells. And we're going to refer to lots of organic compounds. We're going to refer to lipids and proteins when we talk of the structures in a cell. So let's get straight into it. Cells are the basic unit of function in living things. So if we think about organisms, an organism is made up of many cells, and hence we refer to them as multicellular. You get certain organisms that are unicellular, that are made up exclusively of a single cell. And that's very important for us to understand. When we get to grade 11 and 12, we talk of microorganisms that are unicellular. So understand that the cell is the basic functional unit of an organism. And that's important for us to understand going forward. As we get to the next lessons, we will see how cells make up tissues, and how tissues make up organs, and how organs make up systems. So we start off with the smallest, and as we go there, we unpack what's in the cell in terms of the organelles, and then we move on to, in the future lessons, what cells make up. Very important. Cells in animals and plants have a unique form that allow each other to take part in processes that are necessary for living or non-living things to survive. So cells within them have important organelles, and we're going to look at those organelles that play a crucial role in the survival of both living and non-living organisms. And hence we are highly dependent on the organelles within the cell to carry out the essential characteristics of living things, and those would be respiration, photosynthesis, digestion, absorption, etc. So we're going to get to those details in a little while. Here's a nice, very nice diagram of an animal cell. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the typical parts of an animal cell, and then we're going to unpack each part, and we're going to look at the structure and function of each. So it's very important. How do we differentiate between a plant cell and an animal cell? And I know that today's lesson is focusing exclusively on animal cells, but I would like to touch on and compare sometimes plant cells and animal cells, because I know for a fact that you guys have done this already. So it's going to be very good revision for you. So if we look at a typical cell like this, what is key to note is that it doesn't have a fixed structure like you would see in plant cells. Here you clearly see it's got a single membrane on the outside. Not really present would be a cell wall, which would be made up of cellulose, and that's something that we cannot see. The other unique characteristics of an animal cell is that we cannot see a large vacuole that we would predominantly see in a plant cell. So just by looking at this and standing back, I can clearly say that this is an animal cell. And let's get down to the organelles. And what is an organelle, guys? An organelle is a functional unit or structure within the cell that is responsible for the collective survival and metabolic reactions of this cell. So each little part is known as an organelle, and collectively these organelles are important for this organism or for the cell to be able to function. So most important, and something that you would have discussed first, is the nucleus. We're going to look at the nucleus in detail in a little while, and here we clearly see the nucleus, and you know what the functions of the nucleus are. It's a control center of the cell. It controls cellular functioning. It controls cell division. You've done those. We're going to do them in detail in a little while. Right in the middle, you often see a little nucleolus, and we discussed the nucleolus and how it plays an important function in the synthesis of ribosomes. And those are sent out of the cytoplasm, out of the nucleus, into the outside cytoplasm to carry out protein synthesis. Okay. What is very important is within the nucleus we have chromatin network. And chromatin network is made up of DNA. And this is the nucleic acid, and this is again going back to the chemistry of life that we did. We looked at different organic compounds, and we looked at DNA. And DNA basically codes for all the genetic information within the nucleus. And hence it has all the genetic makeup responsible for carrying out functions in the cell. We also have a membrane called the nuclear envelope. We're going to discuss this in detail as I zoom in on a cell. Here we look at the Golgi complex, and this is a little, I would call it the dispatch of the cell, the dispatch center of the cell, where it packs up and packages little substances and proteins and molecules and sends them out as vesicles. We're going to look at that in a little while. So the Golgi body, as we said, packs little structures together to form little vesicles which have enzymes. And those little structures are called lysosomes. And these have enzymes. Enzymes are responsible for digestion within the cell. And lots of cells, like an animal cell, has the ability to release enzymes outside the cell to carry out extracellular digestion. So we looked at enzymes in chemistry of life. We spoke about intracellular enzymes within the cell. And we also spoke about extracellular enzymes outside the cell. So these are the structures or the organelles responsible for the synthesis of enzymes. Okay, here we see a little flagellum, and you know what a flagellum is. Basically, it is a cytoplasmic extension, so it's an extension of the cell wall and a bit of the cytoplasm, which has a bit of actin filaments that are able to contract and relax, allowing the cell to be able to be motile or to move. And that's very important. We don't see this in all animal cells, but I've tried to show you a diagram with many different structures in them. Obviously, we have a cell membrane, which is often referred to as plasma membrane, again, surrounding the plasma or the cytoplasm, which is the internal contents of the cell. I'm going to jump onto the other side. We also find that there are microtubules present in the cell wall, and those are important in the movement of cells. We're going to discuss that in a little while. A very important organelle is the mitochondria. I'm going to zoom in on that in a little while, and I'm going to give you guys a chance to remember. Yes, if you remember the mitochondria, it's the powerhouse of the cell. We're going to talk about that in a little while. We also see centrioles, vesicles, which are little smaller vacuoles that are present with enzymes, and we see the cell contents, or the liquid medium that bathes all these organelles, called the cytosol. It's often referred to as cytoplasm. Okay. A very important structure we also see is this maze of tubes called the endoplasmic reticulum. And in this case, we see it's called the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and because it's dotted with a whole lot of ribosomes on its surface. And very important to remember that the endoplasmic reticulum is an extension of the nucleus. into the outside so that it's able to communicate between the cytoplasm and the nucleoplasm on the inside. And then finally we see the ribosomes, and the ribosomes are basically structures that are produced by the nucleolus, sent out into the cytoplasm, that carry out a very important process of protein synthesis, which you know are made from amino acids. So let's move on to the structures that we need to discuss. And remember that when you look at cell organelles, we spoke about cell organelles. We need to look at, for each cell organelle, its structure, and this is how you remember it. Its structure, its location in a cell, and its function. And these are very important. So when we look at each organelle, we will discuss S, structure, L, location, and F. So if you remember that, and that's how you should remember when you're studying. You should remember its structure, basically whether it's a double unit membrane structure, what shape it has, where it is found in the cell. So the typical structures are found nucleus centrally. You'll find that your flagellum are found in the periphery. So we're going to look at each of these organelles using the following subheadings. Okay, so let's look at some of the important organelles that we see in a general animal cell. So the nucleus we've discussed briefly. I'm going to show you a nice photo micrograph of that. We're going to look at the cytoplasm, and that is the internal contents within which all the organelles are bathed and the medium through which communication occurs within the cell. We also see the centrioles. We're going to look at Golgi apparatus, which we've pointed out. We're going to look at the lysosomes, secretory vesicles. We're going to talk about the mitochondria, the vacuole, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, as well as the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, the cytoskeleton, and finally the cell membrane, which is very important in terms of understanding the movement of substances into and out of a cell. And we'll spend some time looking at the structure and the fluid mosaic model, which I know you guys have done. So let's get straight into the nucleus. So again, the structure of the nucleus, it's a double membrane structure. Here you clearly see there are pores in that. And when you get to grade 12, you'll see that these pores play an important role in releasing the contents that are produced inside, like mRNA that come out. And for the nucleus to be able to be the control center, it needs to be able to communicate with the outside and be able to take in substances into it to establish control network center. And hence we see in the middle of the nucleus, often we see a little darker area, and this we refer to as the nucleolus. And scientists are not too sure yet, but there is significant evidence that shows that it is linked and it has a significant important role in the production of ribosomes. And ribosomes are a type of mRNA that are produced in the nucleus and by the nucleolus and are sent out to carry out the function of protein synthesis. Here we also see that these pores are microscopic pores that allows the exchange of substances. And very important is chromosomes, and this basically is the arrangement of the chromatin network into structures called chromosomes. So these chromosomes we discuss, and you probably have seen them appear like that, and that's basically the chromatin network that starts to wrap itself into the structure which eventually looks like that. And that is when the cell is preparing for cell division. So you're not going to see chromosomes always. It's when the cell prepares for cell division, and you guys are doing mitosis soon at school. That's when we talk of the formation of chromosomes and its significance in cell division. So very quickly, the nucleus is the control center of the cell. It is responsible for cell division. It is also responsible for production of ribosomes. It has a significant importance in the passing on of genetic information from one cell to the next cell. And it has the blueprint of the cell. And the reason why we have information that is identical or similar to our parents and other relatives of us is because of the presence of the chromatin network, which is the genetic information. Very important for us to remember is that the structure of the nucleus is important. We need to remember it's a double unit membrane structure. It's made up of two membranes. It's called the nuclear envelope and with pores. So I think it's almost time for a little break. We guys are going to have a short break. Remember the challenge question, and then I'm going to hand you over to Abraham.
Thank you so much, Eugen. Mindsetters, I should say this, a big shout out to all of you that are tuned in and that are chatting on the page, such as Evans, Apiwe, and Freddy, and everybody that is tuned in. Keep on following us at LearnExtra on Twitter. And now, if you are answering the challenge question, Mindsetters, you must answer on the posted picture, which has the question on Facebook, not on our wall. And the information is there on how to get hold of our submission little box where you can send in your test yourself answers. Otherwise, we'll see you after the break. Welcome back, Mindsetters. Now I see a lot of you are still trying out the challenge question. Get your friends also and your classmates to try it out too, and we'll see the right answer later on. But if you're struggling, you're having some questions, we're here for you. Eugen is going to answer those questions later on. So send them to me. I will make sure that Eugen answers all those questions. I am on facebook.com/LearnExtra or on Twitter at LearnExtra. Over to you, Eugen.
Thanks, Avira. So let's see those questions, guys. I want you to post them and let me see if I can help you. I'm sure we can. So let's go on. So we're going to look at the organelles. We're going to go through these organelles, and then we're going to get to some interesting revision questions where we tie in both animal cells and plant cells, and very important, the organelles that we need to discuss. So here we're seeing a photomitograph. Sorry. Here, if you look at this diagram here we see an electron micrograph showing us the cytoplasm with a whole lot of organelles. And very important to remember is that the cytoplasm is the medium in which communication within the cell occurs, where homeostasis is maintained, where organelles are able to communicate, pass on substances, collect and receive substances. So that is the cytoplasm. Here we see a very important structure, and that's called the centrioles. And for the first time we see something like this exclusively found in animal cells. And this is responsible for the production of spindle fibers during this process of cell division. So we see the structures called centrosomes in the plant cell and the animal cell, but when we get to the animal cells, we see the formation of centrioles, which is not present in plant cells. And these are responsible for the production of spindle fibers, which are from the opposite end of the cell. So these structures you will see are lying perpendicular to each other, and they're made up of 3 tubes. They're made up of 9 rings, and each of them have a series of tubes within them, and hence we refer to them as microtubules. So I'm not going to get into the details of that at the moment. Then we've looked at the Golgi body, and we said here we clearly see it's a series of tubes or membranes that start to form little vesicles that contain enzymes. Okay, so we're going to go through some nice diagrams, and I thought I'd spend some time discussing the cell membrane, and I think it's very important for us to know the cell membrane in detail, because when we get to the next topics like cell diffusion, osmosis and movement through the cell, we need to understand that. And this membrane, if we look at this, and I'm sure you would have heard this, it's referred to the fluid mosaic model. And this basically tells you that the membrane is not a membrane that has a fixed structure. Yes, it's a bilipid layer, meaning that it contains 2 layers, and here we refer to them as a phospholipid bilayer. Here you see that it has these phosphate groups on the outside, and it's got the lipid tails on the inside. And basically it reminds me of little lollies that you tend to use or tend to eat, and these are so the phosphate heads on the outside, so they are hydrophilic, they prefer water, and the lipid tails, which are hydrophobic, are found on the inside. And on the surface of the cell membrane are these glycoproteins, and this is what the body uses to recognize cells as self or non-self. We also see protein channels and binding sites through which substances enter and leave the cell. And here we see the cytoplasm, and here we see the external content. So remember that this model represents the fluid mosaic model. And why is it called fluid? Because remember that the structure changes in terms of the position of the binding sites. It's a mosaic, it's a mixture of protein channels, it's got phospholipids, it's got glycoproteins on its surface, and hence it's not a structure where there's uniformity. So there's lots of variety in the surface of that structure. Very important in controlling the substances entering and leaving. And we refer to this membrane as, yes guys, we refer to it as the selectively permeable membrane, because it has the ability to select substances and differentiate them according to the needs of a cell. So we've done that. Let's go through some of the other. Mitochondria, very important structure. We need to remember that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and it's made up of lots of folds, and those folds are called cristae, and we discuss the significance of this arrangement later on in the question that I've posed to you. Inside the ribosome, inside the mitochondria, there are ribosomes that play an important role in protein synthesis. And the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell that produces energy in the form of ATP, and it needs glucose. And glucose is the fuel that the mitochondria will take and produce ATP to a process known as cellular respiration. And this is essentially what drives the cell. So if you think of muscles in the body or parts in the body that produce lots of energy, those cells would have lots of mitochondria in them to be able to produce lots of ATP to carry out work. Here's an electron micro image of the mitochondria, and here you clearly see, you can see patches of ribosomes, and in them you can see these cristae. And again, it's a double unit membrane structure made up of two layers of membrane. We move on to the endoplasmic reticulum, and as I mentioned earlier on, they can be dotted with ribosome, and hence we refer to them as the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And there could be areas where there are no ribosomes on it, and we refer to that as the smooth ER or smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Again, this is where the nucleus normally is, and this is an extension of the nucleus, where the nucleus is able to come in contact with the external the cytoplasm by this arrangement of tubes on the outside called the endoplasmic reticulum. This is quite a cool photomyograph, lots of color in it, showing you a very important structure known as the ribosome. And when we spoke of the chemistry of life, we spoke about proteins, and we said that proteins were made up of amino acids, and those amino acids were put together by a structure known as the ribosome. And in some textbooks, it just is shown as a snowman, but it's made up of two units. It's made up of a large subunit, a small subunit, and a large subunit here. And it is through this structure that your mRNA goes and proteins are produced. So it's quite a nice photomyograph to look at to understand what it is. We don't need to look at the cytoskeleton. It's very important that you understand the significance, but this is what is important in maintaining the cell membrane and offering its structure, and also the ability of this to be able to bring about movement. And the word itself, cytoskeleton, means that it's responsible for protection of the cell and the ability for it to bring about movement. We come to the skills of applying your knowledge now, and so I've put up a few questions here that relate to these diagrams. So let's look at these questions, and I hope that you guys have some more questions that you could ask me, but let's look at this question. The following flow chart illustrates the relationship between two important processes found in the cells of plants. So if we look at the cells of plants, you'll find that these organelles are there. However, there's one of these organelles are found exclusively in the plant, and one is found both in plant. And I'll give you a moment to think about that. What would this be, guys? An organelle B. If we look at these two organelles, this is obviously a plant cell, a plant organelle found in the cytoplasm, and here we find a mitochondria, which is found in both plant and animal cells. And how do I differentiate between the two? I know that in the mitochondria, there are folds on the internal surface, and those folds represent the cristae, which we clearly see here in this structure here. Whereas in the chloroplast, we see stacks of little coins called thylakoids arranged in that granum. So here we can use that as a distinguishing characteristic of that. So when you have a question like this where you're seeing organelles, the first thing you should do is try and identify the organelle and then move on to trying to attempt to answer the questions. Okay. So let's look at the first question. Identify the metabolic processes that organelles X and Y control respectively. So if we look at these organelles, we said we identified this as the chloroplast, and that's X, and here we looked at this as the mitochondrion. So mitochondrion refers to a single mitochondrion, and the plural would be mitochondria. So what is the biological or metabolic process that occurs in the chloroplast, guys? If you think about it, it is, yes, you've done this in grade 9 as well, photosynthesis. And that occurs in the chloroplast, and that is in organelle, and we identify that as organelle X. If we look at organelle Y, and that is the mitochondria, the process that happens there, we just did that, was cellular respiration. And that is basically the production of energy within the cell. Okay, cool. So that's a 2-mark question. The next question. Name the carbohydrate that is formed by X and by Y. And this is quite an interesting question. And this teaches us how we need to relate what we've done now with what we've done earlier on in the year. So I know that lots of you tend to compartmentalize this topic and forget about that it has a relationship with what you've done. And that's the reason why you spend some time doing chemistry of life, for us to be able to unpack the organic molecules, the biological molecules. This question is the kind of question that relates the first chapter that you've done with what we're doing today. So name the carbohydrate. And now if you guys think about carbohydrates, these are the groups that you've first done in organic compounds. So it refers to your monosaccharides, your disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So that's a bit of that. So name the carbohydrate that is formed by X and Y. So if we go back to the diagram, now we've got to think about what is a carbohydrate that is formed by X and Y. Now, plants produce energy, plants produce some organic molecule by a process known as photosynthesis. So what is that process where photosynthesis produces, what is that compound that is known as when photosynthesis occurs? And so we need, remember that we need carbon, we need oxygen, and we need hydrogen during that process, and that gives us a compound. I'm going to give it to you in its chemical form, C6H12O6. And if you break that down, guys, if you remember, and that's your glucose molecule. So the carbohydrate is glucose that is produced in the plant cell. So name the carbohydrate that is formed by X and used by Y. And that's very important. So we know that for the process of respiration, you see that the plants produce carbohydrates, which is glucose, and that glucose is used by the mitochondria. And that process is known as cellular respiration. And we know the significance of cellular respiration in terms of the production of energy. Provide labels for parts A, B, and C. So let's go up to that diagram again. I've scribbled a lot on it, so I'm going to very quickly try and clear up some of my scribbles on that so you can easily identify the parts. That's A there. Okay, so let's go back and see. So here we see an arrow that points to the structure here. Okay, so that's pointing to the folds, and those folds are called, if you guys remember, I'm sure you got a friend that sounds like Christine, but I'll call that Christe. So the folds have a significant reason why they are folds, and I said I was going to discuss that, but let me just go down and see if there's a question. Yes, there's a question that relates to the significance of the folds, which we need to discuss. So here we're seeing A points to the cristae, and here B refers to the medium that's present internally in this organelle or the mitochondria, and that medium is the matrix. So we refer to that as the matrix. I know many of you, when we refer to the word matrix, you think about Keanu Reeves in the movie The Matrix, but yeah, that's a good way to remember it. So that refers to the internal medium. And by the way, there is some DNA in the mitochondria as well, and the reason I tell you this is because this question comes up in grade 12, so always there's reasons to extend you a bit. If we look at part C, now I remember I spoke about those stacks of coins, and they actually, part C refers, if we were to label part C, we'll call part C the granum. And the granum basically is made up of these stacks of coins, and the stacks of coins are called the thylakoid. And that basically is the structure within which chloroplasts are present that carry out the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so we've identified parts A, B, and C, and we've done that on the diagram. The next question is a very important question, and I think these are the questions that challenge learners often. Give one structural adaptation of each organelle and describe how this enables the organelle to function efficiently. And this is a 4-mark question, guys. To unpack this question, you need to look at it carefully and read it again. Sometimes it seems simple. There's 2 parts to this question. One, we've got to give one structural adaptation, which is very important. We've got to describe how that organelle is adapted for each, and describe how this enables the organism. And the second part is we're going to describe how this enables the organelle to function efficiently. Let's go back to the diagram. If we look at, I'm going to clear this up again. I'm going to very quickly clear this up. Hope it doesn't Okay, let's see. Let's clear this up very quickly. Okay, we spoke about that. Right. If we look at that diagram, here we see the arrangement, and I spoke about the arrangement of the thylakoids here. Here we see thylakoids. Now, imagine that you was a banker and you were collecting coins all the time, and you needed to count them and you need to arrange them in a systematic way. Now, one of the ways in which this structure is adapted is that the thylakoids are arranged in stacks, and these stacks allow for the efficient arrangement and maximum accommodation of the organelle, or the parts that absorb light. We also see the shape of this organelle. It's oval, meaning that it's able to expose itself to light from different sides. So, two adaptations. The grana contains stacks of thylakoids, and we can see that this is the grana, and it contains a whole lot of thylakoids that are arranged in stacks, allowing for greater amount of photosynthesis and the accommodation of more thylakoids in there. If we look at the mitochondria, okay, we spoke of the cristae being folded, and here we see the folded or convoluted, and that's the term that is referred to, convoluted. And if you were to discuss the significance of this, and I were to ask, if you look at even the brain, guys, you've seen images of the brain, and it's often not just this spherical structure. It's got lots of folds, and we refer to it as folds and gyrus and convolutes. Okay, those folds play an important role in increasing the surface area internally. So the significance of this is, when you look at the mitochondria, it plays an important role in cellular respiration. So how do we increase the efficiency of cellular respiration? We have provided an internal surface area which is increased by these folds, so that more of the enzymes responsible for the process of photosynthesis can be accommodated. So the folds increase the surface area, thus making the process of respiration much more efficient. So we've looked at this question, and this is a typical type of question that comes in when you've done sections on respiration, on plant and animal cells, and you know the structures and you can compare them. And that's very important. You should be able to relate two different cells together and see how they play an important role structurally and how they're dependent on each other. Lots of questions like this can come. So I think it's time for a break, Abraham.
Yes, you can. And I must say this to all the mindsetters: if you are submitting your answers, make sure that you are submitting the right answers. I see that some of you are submitting blank answers, so that's not going to get you anywhere, mindsetters. So make sure you get the right answers so that you could stand a chance of winning that awesome Vodacom airtime voucher. Otherwise, keep your questions coming on facebook.com/LearnExtra. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back, mindsetters. Now the moment that we've all been waiting for, which is to get the right answer of the challenge question. Here it is from you again.
So remember, guys, the question that we had challenged you with was what cell structures are found only in animal cells? Now, I'm sure you went back and you started looking at it. I did hint, and if we go back, there was a nice image that we had of a structure. And I'm sure lots of you posted this question. What is very important, I'm going to give you guys a clue to those guys that didn't answer the question before I get to the answer. I spoke about cell division in plant and animal cells, and we spoke about centrosomes, and we said that in plants, centrosomes form, and eventually the centrioles give rise to move to the opposite poles where they produce the spindle fibers. However, in a plant cell, we do not see what we call the centrioles. Okay, we do not see the centrioles. And essentially, when we look at the centrioles, they are found exclusively in animal cells. And these were those tubes. If I very quickly go back to my image here, and I spoke of the centrioles, and these images would be, and this would be we spoke about this, the set of microtubules that lie opposite each other, perpendicular to each other at the opposite ends of the poles in anticipation of cell division. And from these, you find the spindle fibers forming and giving rise so that cell division can take place. So for those of you that got the answer, well done. For those of you that didn't get the answer, I hope you have been thinking along similar lines. But yeah, it was kind of a question that would challenge you to think, and I'm glad if you got it right. Well done. Abraham.
Thank you so much again. And now let's look at the questions that the mindsetters have sent us. The first question is from Masako Mpahlele. What is the cell sap made up of?
What is the cell sap made up of? So I'm going to very quickly, I'm going to scroll down a bit here, and if we go down to, okay, if we think about cell sap, sorry guys, let me just very quickly clear that. So the centrioles was the answer. If we go to a cell, and if we look at the nucleus, and we spoke of the cytoplasm. Sorry, we spoke of the cytoplasm. When we refer to the cell sap, now there are two structures in a plant cell. I've done an animal cell here. We refer to the cytoplasm. In an animal cell, the cytoplasm basically is the sap. And this is the contents of the cell that contains all the products of digestion. So when you absorb glucose, when you absorb nutrients such as amino acids, vitamins, your salts, your micronutrients, your macronutrients, all those are present in the cytoplasm or the cytosol. However, if you think of if you think of a plant cell, and a plant cell has a vacuole, and that we refer to as the cell sap. In that, you find that the products of photosynthesis are stored, so you find the glucose present, and you'll find water as well. And this gives the cell its shape, and that is because of a process called turgidity, where the vacuole applies pressure on the cell. So, to answer the question, what is the cytoplasm made up of? It contains all the nutrients present in the cell, and that includes all the micro and macronutrients and your organic compounds. In a plant cell, the internal contents of a vacuole is the cell sap, and that has the products of photosynthesis along with water.
Thank you. Moyahabo Mahato says, what is osmosis?
Osmosis. Now, that's a very good question, and I'd like to take you back to the diagram of the cell membrane. Very important question. I managed to briefly discuss the function of the cell membrane, but I think we need to look at that question. It's quite an important section that you need to do, and you probably do it when you get back, when you're done with this section. So we refer to this model as the fluid mosaic model. If I extend my page a bit, remember that one thing that we spoke about the cell membrane, we said that it is selectively permeable. Now, the word selectively permeable comes from, it's broken up, it selects, and permeability refers to the ability of substances to move in and out. So I remember when I was in school, our teachers would say, sure, your minds are very permeable, because whatever they taught us would flow out and never be kept in. And that's permeability, something that's porous that allows substances to go in and out. But that's selectively permeable. There's two important concepts that you need to discuss when you talk of movement of substances into and out of a cell. So movement of substances through a cell happens through two processes, and we refer to them as diffusion and osmosis. Now, if we were to unpack diffusion and osmosis, it's quite simple. I'll start with osmosis first because it relates to the cell membrane. So when we talk of movement of substances through a selectively permeable membrane or a membrane, that is osmosis. So and I use this diagram to help me. So if you have a ball on the top and you need to move it down, it rolls down. And this tells you that there's a high concentration of substances. So when substances move from a high concentration to a low concentration through a membrane, and that membrane is a selectively permeable membrane, we refer to that as osmosis. So the key things to remember, osmosis is the movement of water molecules from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration, but it has to be through a semi-permeable membrane or a selectively permeable membrane. So osmosis is the movement from high to low through a membrane. And diffusion would be the movement of substances. It does not necessarily depend, it does not have to be through a membrane. It could be diffusion through the atmosphere. It could be diffusion through a membrane, which is not necessarily living. So movement through a cell wall could be diffusion and not necessarily osmosis.
Thank you.
Abraham, that was a nice question.
All right. Here's I think I have two questions following up the challenge question. The first one is from let me see. It's from Nobile Shabalala. Why is it sensual?
Why?
Why was the answer centriole?
Why was the answer centriole? What answer did she post, Abraham?
She didn't tell me, but I think there's only one mindsetter out of maybe 36 mindsetters that answered central, and the rest of mindsetters gave me different answers, such as cell plant.
Okay, wrong.
And some were saying, okay, they are confused between rough air and
Rough ER.
that's what
air.
most mindsetters said.
Well, guys, let me remind you. Is it mobile?
Yes.
Did I get it right?
Yes.
Okay. So the reason why okay, if you look at, I discussed this, and I'm sure you guys have done plant cell and animal cells. When we get to the process of cell division, you'll find that in animal cells and in plant cells, the process is slightly different. In animal cells, you find that you have a centrosome that gives rise to the centrioles, and from the centrioles, you find the process, the spindle fibers developing. However, in animal cells, you find that the centrosome splits up and moves to the opposite poles, and it is from the centrosome that the spindle fibers develop, and the absence of centrioles in plant cells. And essentially, the reason why we see that in plant cells is they control the release, the production of the spindle fibers, and that is through which animal cells can divide and pull out the chromosomes to the opposite poles, whereas in plant cells, that process relies on the centrosomes. Okay.
Okay. And then another one, it's from Ayanda. Ayanda asks, why centriole is only found in animal cell?
Okay, why is it? Again, I explained that, and essentially it is there so that it controls the process of replication. If you think about the cell wall and the cell membrane, the plant cell has got a fixed membrane. It's made up of cellulose. It's quite a rigid structure, whereas an animal cell has got a cell membrane that is flexible and it can contract. So essentially, it's there so that the cells can pull together the spindle fibers and contract the chromosomes to the opposite poles, so that during cell division, and that's the reason why it is there.
Okay.
Okay.
Another one is from Lindu Musa. What's the use of ribosomes in their mitochondria?
Okay, so some tongue twisting words there. Ribosome. Guys, remember we spoke about the function of a ribosome, and now very quickly, let's remind the learners of ribosomes, and their function is protein synthesis. So they're responsible for protein synthesis. So we looked at the mitochondria, and we said that the mitochondria is that structure that has lots of folds, and in them we find ribosomes. So why would ribosomes need to be in the mitochondria? I'll actually answer that question with a question. So what does the mitochondria do? It produces energy. If it produces energy, what does it need? It needs enzymes. So if it needs enzymes, where are those enzymes getting the energy from? So here's the mitochondria. If we look at the structure here, it's got a whole lot of folds, and here we see the mitochondria. Why is that important? Ribosomes produce proteins. Yes, and proteins make up enzymes. So those are the enzymes that are responsible for the process of cellular respiration. So the mitochondria is quite efficient as a structure in itself. And the reason it needs to have the ribosomes is to produce the proteins that are essential to make the process of cellular respiration highly efficient.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Mayamela would like to know if the chloroplast consists of starch or lamella.
Starch or lamella? Now, that's quite a good question. I'm going to go back to, let me see if I can find my diagram. It's in that question that we discussed. It's in our, let's see. Here we are. Are we here? Yes, cool. So let's look at this very quickly. So I'm gonna use this diagram to remind us of the structure of the chloroplast. So let's go down. Let's extend this page. Okay. So the chloroplast, guys, is that oval structure. It's a double unit membrane. We spoke about it having lamellae, and we spoke of it having thylakoids and grana. Now the question that is it the young lady that asked Abraham? What's her name?
Mayamela.
Mayamela. Now, if you think about the structure of the chloroplast, it's made up of these stacks of coins, and we spoke about them, and we said that they are granum. And what happens in the chloroplast? Yes, photosynthesis. So if photosynthesis produces C6H12O6, which is Glucose, good. It also needs to store some of that glucose because the glucose is a substance which is, and I'll use this term again, I've not used it, but it's osmotically active, which means that glucose can affect the potential of that cell. When we have glucose in its monosaccharide form, it becomes very difficult for that cell to be able to maintain cellular activity. However, what it does is that it converts the glucose to a polysaccharide, which is known as starch. And that starch is present in the stroma, the liquid part of the chloroplast. And it is there as a storage molecule. So yes, the plant's chloroplasts do contain starch, and the lamella that we spoke about are the tubes that connect a granum to the other. So these little, they're called intergranum lamellae, and they connect, so that's the lamellae. And they connect the granum together to ensure that the process of respiration happens and it is coordinated.
Okay. Another question from Peter Mukhalaka. What is the difference between animal cell and plant cell?
Yo, Peter, we can tabulate lots of differences. And I'm glad this question is coming in towards the end of the term, end of the segment, because I could go on for another half an hour talking about this. So if I were you, Peter, I'll very quickly draw a table and I'll compare the differences between animal cells and plant cells. So for some reason, my board seems to be doing its own tricks today, but anyway, I'll very quickly chat to you about. So if you think of plant cell and animal cells, have an image of these two cells in your head. A plant cell has got a cell wall, cell membrane. An animal cell has exclusively a cell membrane. Plant cells have a large vacuole. Animal cells have, if they do, they've got very small vacuoles or they're not present. And we spoke about one key difference, which was in the challenge question. Animal cells have a century. Yes, they have centrioles, whereas plant cells do not have centrioles. We spoke about animal cells having lysosomes or vesicles. If they are present in plant cells, they may be present, but not in all cells. So those are the questions. So there's lots of differences. Peter, you can go on, but I'd suggest that you tabulate these differences. Take two cells and look at them. It could be flagellum, it could be the presence and absence of them. So cool, a very nice question. Vacuole present, vacuole not present. Lots of differences, at least 7, 8 you can pick up.
All right, and related to that, Latricia asks, where do we find the animal plant and plant cell?
Where do we find?
The animal cell and the plant cell.
Where do you find the animal cell and the plant cell? Latricia, well, you got to be looking around far. Well, if you pinch yourself, you're pinching an animal cell. And plant cells, Latricia, I'm sure at supper tonight when you're going to be having lettuce or salads, you're eating lots of plant cells. But if you want to do this experiment at school, very easy. Go and tell your teachers to give you some iodine. Take some onions from home, break the onion, and you'll find that instead of cutting, you break the leaf open. So remove a scaly leaf, and when you get to the first fleshy leaf, break it open and peel that. And the little film or the layer of cells that you find in that tissue is actually a layer of cells. And that you could stain with, try staining that with iodine, because all the starch would easily stain and you'll be able to see that. If you're looking for animal cells, and a good way to do that is to take a toothpick and to gently scrape the inner cheek inside your mouth and put that onto a cell, and you should be able to see some of your squamous epithelial cells in the lining of your mouth. So animal cells, guys, we can find everywhere. Plant cells, you name them, you can pick them up from, you can look at a leaf under a microscope. The best source would be an onion. You can even look at, there's so much to look at, yeah.
Awesome. Look around. I guess that's the right answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, the last question for now. How do dissolved nutrients move across the cell membrane?
How do dissolved nutrients move across the cell membrane? Awesome question, guys. And we'll deal with this probably at a lesson stage, but it's very important to remember that there's two types of movements, osmosis and diffusion. But even osmosis and diffusion can happen actively or passively. And that refers to the process where energy is needed or passively where energy is not needed. So in terms of the absorption of glucose, so when we consume our food and it's broken up into amino acids, glucose, and the nutrients that, the micro and macronutrients that we get from our food, that needs to be absorbed into the cell into this animal cells. And that happens to the cell membrane. And that is based on either the diffusion gradient or the water potential. And I'm not too sure if you guys have heard of water potential, but that refers to the tendency of molecules to move from a region of high water potential to a region of low water potential. So essentially, and I'm trying to say this very quickly and say this fast, it'll depend on the concentration within the cell. So when glucose is absorbed from the bloodstream into the cells in the body, it is through active absorption. Substances like salt can be passively absorbed. So depending on the requirements of the body, different substances tend to move in depending on the concentration of the cell, either actively or passively through diffusion or osmosis.
Thank you so much again. Unfortunately, that's where we have to end it for today.
But it was good. Lots of nice questions, guys. Thanks for posting those questions.
Thank you, Mindsetters, and know that due to the number of questions that we receive, we can't answer all your questions. There's always a help desk at mindset.co.za where you can send us those questions. But for me and you again, we just want to say it's been a great afternoon spending it with you. Great times. Till next time. Peace.